All things are symbols. The external shows of nature have their image in the mind, as flowers and fruits and falling of the leaves. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Welcome to this week's episode of Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd, and as always, I am your host. I'd like to thank you all for listening and joining me this week. Any newcomers, welcome, and of course returning guests, thank you as always. Now, I've been very happy with the reception of last week's episode. It's really kind of done really well, especially compared to the last one or two. But the last one was very popular, at least when it comes to Europe. So, thank you all for listening in such high numbers. And on that note, I don't have too much in the way of corrections for that, at least not yet. I haven't received any negative or questioning feedback on that one just yet. So if you did have some questions on that one or this one, please let me know. So let's go ahead and proceed along in our overview of humanity in Western Europe, circa 8,000 to 6,000 BC, BCE. Now, first, there are a couple of points about the Mediterranean islands that I wanted to kind of expand on. I know I had mentioned that pottery got to a couple of those places, but I wanted to dive in specifically on the nature of these islands as the pottery is arriving. And I kind of felt like they deserved their own little section, so that's what this is. Now, Sicily is very similar to mainland Italy in terms of lifestyle of the Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. Though I was able to read about an innovation that appears to emerge as kind of an independent event or independent style that evolves in a couple of places in the northwest of the island. And this emerges actually in between 10,000 to 8,000 BC. It could have happened before this season. But there are a couple of sites in the northwest where you have rock art, and it is very much focused solely on humans and the human form. And you see a vast drop of depictions of these large animals, which makes sense. They're not there anymore. Like the large herds and things like that, they begin to disappear. Of course, you still have some animal depictions, but generally you're seeing more like individual animals, deer, birds, that kind of thing. So this change is being reflected in the art that's being made at this time, which, if you remember all those episodes ago, last year before, we talked about how a lot of the theories around the paintings of the animals being kind of a shamanistic kind of painting these animals to draw their spirits out in the spirit world so that they would appear to you in the physical world. If you stop seeing these animals, you can imagine that if that is the case, at least partly, even if it's just part of the reason they're making these paintings, it's going to cause a lot of consternation. And this might help explain kind of the breakdown of these epigravidian sites. The shamanistic practices may not be enough to hold groups together, or they may cause groups to completely just try to come up with a new set of beliefs, or maybe re-emphasize smaller beliefs to become more important. It's possible that, it's obviously not going to go away all at once overnight, but it's possible that the depiction of the animal may become much less primary focus than, say, a depiction of the human, or, partaking in other rituals that don't leave a trace, that are more in line with balancing humans' place in the world as opposed to balancing the human and the animal in the world together. But those are just, some small thoughts and theories about that kind of thing. And I forget the name of the places. I did not write them down. I believe the one that I saw that was the oldest was Adadura. I believe was the site in Sicily. And of course, we talked about how, the cardium the pottery that we talked about last weekend, the cardium shell pottery, begins to show up in parts of Sicily, and that will, of course, begin to expand out. But in terms of tools and things like that, as far as I could tell, Sicily is very similar to mainland Italy. Now, we will go a little bit further to the south of Sicily, and then we're going to get to the island of Malta. Now, Malta is only possibly occupied during our season. But the earliest piece of evidence that we have for Homo sapien habitation of the islands doesn't confirm that humans were there until around 5,900 to 5,800. And it appears that these people are all heavily influenced by seafarers from the places to the east that we've talked about the last couple of seasons. So it's possible that, people trying to make a journey around the boot of Italy to get to someplace like Sicily may have gotten blown off course, and they ended up on Malta, and they ended up, began to live there or visit there before they developed like this local society. But that does not happen this season. That is something that happens much later. Now, then we have Corsica and Sardinia. And these, of course, have been occupied by Homo sapiens for a while. And even earlier hominids had, been on those islands possibly as far back as 450,000 years ago. It could have been like the pre-Neanderthals or some form of Homo erectus. But the oldest complete modern human skeleton dates to around 7,000 BC, and this is on Sardinia. And in that human's burial and in areas close to it, you do see a really nice mix of Neolithic and Mesolithic technologies and tools and artifacts. So, you can begin to see signs of pottery showing up at that kind of time period. But, the Mesolithic peoples are not gone. They're still there. So it's possible they may have been trade partners, or they may have been welcoming in these newcomers who are bringing this, new technology. It could have been a small number to begin with, and, they welcomed them in, and then later these other people show up, and eventually the original inhabitants are outnumbered, but they're not violently replaced, or maybe they were. It's hard to say. Again, this is just one of those things we don't have a lot of evidence on. But again, Sardinia, really nice mix of the Neolithic and Mesolithic traditions, and that's true in Corsica as well. But that being said, this begins a very long period of time on the islands, and it covers a number of different material and social cultures. This is known as the PreNuragic period. When we talk about the Nuragic period, this is a term based on some of the monumental structures that are built on the island. But this is a much later period, and they'll go through several different successive cultures on the island that will eventually culminate into what is known as the Nuragic period. Now, and one of the big reasons Sardinia was probably a huge draw in this earlier period is because of the obsidian found on the island. And this, of course, becomes a major important trade commodity before the Bronze Age, and even during it. I'm sure it was a supplemental material along with everything else you could find on the island. But there are a number of places, of course, in Italy and Sicily that you can get Obsidian from, but due to Sardinia's position, it's a very good north-south. You can either travel directly north to get to the coast of what is now southern France, or you can just travel south to get to the coast of northern Africa. So you might not have to worry, about circling Italy to get to Asia to find trade partners. You have some very close by options. And not even to mention, you could, of course, continue to sail west into the Iberian region. Whereas those other places in Italy, they might have good overland routes, or they might be more interested in trading with peoples to the east. And this is one of the big factors we'll talk about when we talk about long scale or long distance and large scale trade. But Sardinia, very important for a number of reasons that we will get to later. Now there's also the island of Pantelleria, which that is also known as Kosira or Kosura, if you're depending on your dialect of Greek. That's a very small island to the south west of Sicily. It's about halfway between Sicily and the tip of North Africa. So, whereas Malta is kind of to the southeast of Pantelleria, but Pantelleria is a lot smaller. So it's not quite as well known, and it's not quite as important, but I think Obsidian can be found there too. However, from what I can tell, no one lived there at this point in time, and that is true as well as for the Balearic Islands, which are these three kind of islands off the east coast of Spain. Majorca is, I think, the largest of those. Those do not become occupied until, I want to say it's like 3000-ish BC. So we may not even get to them next season. That's something that I'll have to figure out. So those are the big Mediterranean islands that kind of deserve their own special mention. Now, we are going to continue back to the mainland of Western Europe. And like the last 2 weeks, we started in the south, and we will continue to do so and begin to make our way to the Iberian Peninsula. And we will, of course, begin with a little bit of etymology. Now, of course, Iberia is from the Latin Iberia, which itself came from an ancient Greek word, which was Iberia or Iberia, maybe a little bit more. Pardon my Greek pronunciation; it's not very good. But this word came from a river known as Iberos, which is possibly from a people who lived along that river. So it's unclear if the name comes from the people or the river, but the Celt-Iberian name was Iber, and of course in Spanish this is the modern Ebro. Now, interestingly enough, and I'm not going to dive into too much of this now because it's like this big thing and it's very confusing and complicated, but there was an identical name that was also given to a people in the Caucasus, in what is now Georgia. So, we'll get into how this happens later, but it's possible that they're both Indo-European related, and that it's something to do with, we'll get into it later because it's really complicated, and I don't want to just get off track for too long. But yes, Iberia is a name for a people who gave their name to a river, and then the Greeks used that river name to describe the region, and eventually it came to mean everything basically south of the Pyrenees. So that's where it comes from. There you go. Now, last season, when we talked about this region, we went into detail on the Azilian culture. Now, this spread through northern Spain, southern France, and it's breaking up right around the time this season starts. Now, you may remember the Azilian were fairly, well known for their kind of small painted pebbles. I talked about, or at least I mentioned how that there are some people who claim that this was a form of writing, and that they used this to convey like a written information. Now, of course, that's just one theory. Not everyone subscribes to this. In fact, I'd say most people don't. And even if it was a writing system, unfortunately, there's no way for us to have any way of deciphering it or being able to understand what it means, just because, of course, where all these stones have been found, all of the other, evidence or context has been just lost to time. So, sadly, we don't know what these were for. If anything, they could have just been types of decoration. I'm sure that they had a purpose aside from that, but I doubt it was any form of complex writing system. I don't think there was any need to invent anything like that at this point in time, which, as we'll find out, writing is almost always an answer to some type of large-scale need. But we'll return to that type of discussion in the future. For now, though, we should move on to the kind of advancement of these peoples outside of, or as the Azilian fades away. Now, why this happens is hard to say. I know we talked about climate change being very radical. And it was. However, this region, like southern, or like southeastern Europe and Italy, did not deal with the worst of the climate change. Going south of the Pyrenees, you're probably running into very similar climate throughout, all of that, all of the Younger Dryas. But that being said, it's very possible that there were more people coming south, or maybe coming from the sea. Who knows? It's also possible that with the retreat of the ice caps, that there were groups in the former Azilian territory that wanted to go north and explore and see what the ice had left, or what the retreating ice had left behind. All of these are kind of valid theories until we ever get a definitive answer, which I doubt we will. But the Azilian, for the most part, are replaced by, not necessarily replaced, but you also see, I guess, an emergence of a secondary group from the Azilian, and this is referred to as the Astorian. Now, the Astorian are a little bit more of a mystery compared to the Azilian. We don't have any kind of art for them. They don't appear to have been interested in making art anywhere close to what the Azilian did. But what we do have for them is something very similar to a pickaxe. It's made from kind of a quartzite cobblestone, and they averaged about 8.5 centimeters in length, and one end was pointed, but they didn't use it to mine stone. It showed that they were, used more for detaching limpets from where they had sunk themselves into. And limpets are kind of like a snail's, things like that. So they're kind of gastropod. And they were essentially using these cobbles to kind of farm up limpets from the rivers and the ponds that they were living in. They also had bone tools and other types of bladed stones, and they were, but these are not nearly as well founded as the pickaxes are. We do have a lot of shell middens in these in their sites. They're very similar to the types of shell middens found in Azilian sites, but they're kind of made up, or they have a lot of different stones, I think, in those kind of trash piles. So you have a lot of the same types of food, but the types of stone used to make tools is a little bit different. The Azilian had a lot of flint, whereas the Astorian appears to just mostly rely on quartzite, whereas the Azilian don't appear to have any quartzite at all. So it has been put forward that it's possible that the Astorian, what we found for them, is not even where they were living primarily. That this type of coastal sites that you find that are Astorian are actually kind of a seasonal, I guess, occupation point. That they were just coming there during specific types of the year, or maybe every couple of years, to kind of exploit a different resource rather than having to exploit where you would prefer to live permanently. The seafood, they think it was exploited in late winter and early spring, when other food is very scarce. So that is one theory about the Asturian. Also, they're very further to the west of the Azilian, so they're not in the same range 1-to-1. There's a little bit of overlap, but by and large there is also a difference. You also find a lot of other fish. It's not just shellfish. They're also fishing as well. In fact, I think some of the places they've found over 20 different types of some type of fish species. So if they were fishing seasonally, they needed a lot of it in this less warmer period of the year. They were also hunters of deer. That shouldn't be a surprise. Red deer still fairly extant in the region. And of course, you have other types of deer, boar, wild aurochs, and even there are still some ibex. Those wild type sheep or wild goats are also being hunted. It's also a very wooded area. I think it'd probably be a little bit more wooded than you would expect to see today in the area, which also helps keep the deer population happy and in the region. And this culture will persist for a while longer. I think the latest it could have been is about 4,500. So it'll still be in place when we return for the future. Now, in terms of, moving north from the old Azilian stomping grounds, you get to the, it's the Salter. This is where one of my pronunciation problems is going to come in. French. Salvatarian is the name of one of these kind of late Mesolithic cultures in Europe. And this is mainly in France. It's kind of north of the Pyrenees. I don't think they found any of these sites in the old Azilian area. But it's possible that they were. It's just we haven't found the evidence. Just keep that in mind. And it is probably emerging right towards the end of our current time frame, right around 6,500, give or take. Possibly, yeah. It is very much through Western Europe. Found a couple of different places. I think it comes from a specific type site in it's the French. It's Lot et Garonne. It's in the southwestern part of France, but it's all throughout that region. And these people are beginning to practice that Neolithic tool assemblages. They have the microliths. They do a lot of stuff with smaller than they are, or narrower than they are, longer type blades. So again, that's something that shows that they have definitely shifted away from the kind of the large game that you would find in the Middle Ages. They're beginning to look and work for smaller animals, waterfowl, things like that. They also have their own type of ritual burial. Now, unfortunately, most of the information on that comes from a paper by Nicolas Valerian. It is in French. I cannot read French. It was published in 2008. You could read all about it if you spoke French. My translations of it are spotty, to say the least. And all I know is that he believes it was a highly ritualized and highly, trying to use the correct term, very formal burial. This wasn't something that they would just drop someone in a hole, put some artifacts in there with them, and say goodbye. He believes that this was a very in-depth process. I believe he mentions red ochre being involved, which that's a very old thing. That is not at all stuck in Europe. There are a number of places all across the world where red ochre is used in kind of a burial type situation, and we'll talk about some of those in other places. But it's I'm going to try and translate a little bit more, but it was done by HAL Open Science, I think is the publication, and the title is Salvatorian et Salvatoriano, and then there's a much longer subheading under that. But he also mentions North Italy as being part of this culture as well. In fact, it could have spread all throughout Western Europe. It could have gone up onto the Atlantic coast, even maybe parts of the modern day Belgium and Netherlands, if not even into Europe or Germany. And this will continue to last till about 4,500. So it's a long-lasting culture. I've got some time to do some more research, but this is something that begins again to emerge right towards the end of our time frame. After the Azilian has vanished, this is probably an offshoot of them. Now, you also have another group known as the Boronian, or in some places this is referred to as the Tardenoisian culture. It is also considered an Mesolithic culture, and this is found mostly in northern France and Belgium. It does not show up in the south. So they probably were interacting quite a bit with the Salvatarian, it was, now it is also an offshoot of the Aurensburgian, who we talked about last week, and of course in the episode on the Younger Dryas in Europe, 10,000 BC. They were also beginning to experiment with the microliths of the other cultures. So they're beginning to develop their own tools, their own Neolithic traditions. And most of these places were probably going to get there eventually. However, as we will talk about, forces from Anatolia and further east are kind of speeding this process up one way or the other. So you also find a much wider variety in terms of shapes in the Tardonosian. They have trapezoids. Also, they have much smaller flint blades that are used. They're using a different technique to shape flint. They have more types of triangular blades that you'll see. They're not necessarily kind of all made the same way. So they're experimenting a lot in terms of how they're creating their tools. And these people are probably also in parts of southeastern Britain. I haven't talked about it too much, but of course there is a period of time where the island of Britain is connected to Western Europe via land bridge. This is known as Doggerland. Most people believe that by 6000 BC, this land bridge has completely collapsed. It is now all underwater. However, there is some new evidence, and it is being argued and being debated, but it's possible that this land bridge does not close until as late as, I think, 5,300-ish, 5,500-ish. It's being debated again. It's I even saw one source say it could have been as late as like 4,000 BC. Now, I don't think that's correct in any case. I don't think anyone is widely accepting that date. I think there's too much counterclaim. But that's not to say that the coast isn't maybe a lot shorter than it is now. It could be that there were fluctuations in the I guess in that area that would have made it a little bit shorter of a journey. But that's something that they're dealing with all throughout the coast of Western Europe. And when we say that it's still connected, it's not connected. Even the people saying it's 3800 BC, they're not saying it's the same way it was in the Younger Dryas. They're just saying that there's this small little land bridge. It's it's slowly getting flooded. It would essentially be the part of Britain that is connected to. It would be connected to what is now Belgium. It's just a very small strip of land. There'd still be a formation of the English Channel between Cornwall and Brittany. You would not have like a full land bridge. The English Channel would be there; it just wouldn't go all the way through. Is essentially what they're saying. But it may not even be as far west as Belgium. It could just be that little connection between Dover and Calais. It could have been just that narrow of a land bridge. But again, that's all currently being heavily debated, and I don't know enough about geography or environmental sciences to really weigh into heavily. I'm thinking it's more likely, the 6,000 or like the 5,800. Kind of at the latest. That's my personal opinion. But we'll see. There's always new evidence getting turned up. Maybe they'll find like a bunch of like submerged Mesolithic settlements like right in the middle of the English Channel one day and all the tools. But we'll have to wait and see on that one. Let's see here. How far in this are we? About 30 minutes, give or take. Okay. Well, let's see. All right. Well, I think this is probably a good place to call it. Next week we will return. We'll talk about the specifics of prehistoric Great Britain. What has changed since the 10,000 BC episode. And we'll also talk about Ireland. I think there's a little bit more to talk about than the last time. I think that there's probably finally permanent human habitation on the island to really dive into. And that'll give us a nice little bow tie to this part of the season. And then of course we'll start our bonus episodes. I'm planning on doing some more like regular ones during this period, so these episodes will actually seem more like bonus episodes. They're not gonna be taking the place of all of my regular episodes. That's not to say there won't be a week or two where we just have the bonus episode, but it's not going to be just those and no history, at least this year. I think I've got my subjects down, but if you do have a suggestion, let me know. It might be something I could work in next season, or just one that I would do naturally, because I do need breaks off from the normal stuff every now and then. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Thank you all for dropping by this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any feedback, please let me know. You can reach me at waradrevpod@gmail.com. You can also contact me at Twitter. I will have the link to my Twitter in the episode description. You can direct message me there. You can also comment on any of my videos on YouTube. It does not matter to me. Whatever you would like to do, I would be happy to hear from you and get, again, any kind of positive feedback or criticism. I'd be happy to hear. So thank you all. I hope you have a good rest of your day and rest of your week. Thank you all. Goodbye.